Thank you all for joining us today for what we believe will be an engaging and introspective discussion of a glimpse into the future of legal space. I'd like to thank our sponsor, IFMA's Legal Industry Council, for the opportunity to bring together this very distinguished panel of real estate and facilities professionals from well-known law firms around the country. I'm Buzz Riley. I'm Principal and Managing Director of IA's New York office. IA Interior Architects is a global design firm of architects, designers, strategists, and specialists focused exclusively on environments through the lens of interior architecture. We've had the privilege of working with AmLaw 200 firms over the years and have had the privilege of being both participant and driver in the evolution of law firm design. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today, and we'll ask Paul Abrahamson to start us off. Paul?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Abrahamson, Director of Real Estate for Perkins Coie. Our firm is located our headquarters is in Seattle, Washington. However, I'm based out of Chicago. I've been with the firm for approximately 1 year now, which has been very interesting during COVID. And my previous experience in real estate management has been in the financial services sector, mostly with Deloitte and Grant Thornton running their real estate and facilities.
Thank you, Paul. Joseph?
Hello, everybody. My name is Joseph Geierman. I'm Director of Real Estate and Facilities for Troutman Pepper. Formerly worked at Troutman Sanders for 10 years and went through a merger this past year. I have about 20 years of experience in real estate and facilities, and obviously 11 of those have been at law firms.
Chris?
Good morning. My name is Chris Rushop with Arnold Porter. I'm based out of our Washington, D.C. office, which is also our headquarters. I've been with the firm since 2018. My primary role is really at the intersection of real estate, design, construction, operations, facility, and IT. So I support and work closely with all of those team members. I've got about 25 years of design and construction experience. Prior to joining the firm, I was with CBRE, working on behalf of Arnold Porter as a client. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And of course, last but not least, John.
Okay, hey everybody, how's it going? I'm John Stanley. I'm the Managing Director of Faegre Drinker, Biddle and Reese. I had to pause there because we just merged about a year ago. Before that, I was with the legacy firm Faegre Baker for about 13 years and have been in this role for about 6 of those years, and kind of steadily increased the real estate portfolio that I work on, which is a primary aspect of the job there. But we've got combined about, I think we have 22 offices and about 1,400 lawyers. And while I'm in the Indianapolis office, we're just spread across the US, and we have some presence in London and also China.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you all. And thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. And I'm looking forward to our upcoming discussion. To our, to our participants, you will find a Q&A option on your control panel that should have launched when you joined the call. Please feel free to enter any questions. We have reserved some time at the end of our webinar, about 15 minutes, to go through and address as many questions as we possibly can. So without further ado, I would like to begin. Let's see. Okay, I'm learning technology as we go, as I have been for the past 10 months. So it was just over a year ago that the first diagnosed case of COVID-19 was confirmed in the US on January 22nd. It marks the time that everything we knew as routine and normal began to radically shift. It was just 10 months ago, over 10 months ago, that remote working, work from home, and distributed workforce became commonplace terms in describing our new normal in corporate America. In that time, we've all sought ways to maintain this business continuity and to hold firmly to our organization's long-term visions and goals, and ultimately our successes. We've all been engaged in conversations on the future of workplace, the future of the office. I believe it is safe to say that we know that the coming months and years will be an exploratory journey in rethinking not only where we do business, but how we do business. Law firms face a unique set of challenges in the coming post-pandemic world around how to use their office space. Many firms had already begun to evolve and consider incorporating novel ideas, new ideas around universal office sizes for attorneys, larger open office areas for administrative functions, and exactly what the role of legal staff in firm operations are, just to name a few. Reliance on remote working to meet challenges brought by the pandemic has been a catalyst in raising questions on how law firms may best use their space and what changes we may start to see. So let us begin today hearing from our panelists on the state of their respective offices. So gentlemen, current remote working status, operations, and policy. Paul, what percentages of your offices are currently in a remote work from home status?
Yeah, we're at 100%, and we have been pretty much all along since late last spring. We are currently looking at a return to work in July. However, that is a pretty lax, policy and subject to change as it has a couple times in the past.
Chris, how about your firm?
Pretty much the same, with the exception of possibly our Asian offices, we're still 100% remote. And in terms of return to work, I think a lot of that's going to be based on localized conditions, meaning some offices have come back and then gone back into lockdown depending on the intensity of the virus. So I think, as Paul mentioned, I think we've set a aspirational goal of maybe mid-year, but it's something that's totally fluid. So I think we're going to be remote until then, at least.
So Joseph and John, you are both from firms that have gone through mergers recently. How has this affected how has remote working affected the merger? How have you been successful in being able to continue forward with the merger and with adapting to remote working?
You want to go first, John?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a big question, and obviously when we combined at the beginning of the year, you said the timing was almost perfect. Also, the pandemic hits, we're just getting to know each other. I remember for us, all of our offices had to shut down in March because we actually had a little bit of an event where we had a speaker come in who ended up having COVID, and then people were flying around the country. At the time, nobody knew a lot of what that meant, so we were shutting down, and a lot was going on there. Ultimately, I think, you never want to say, yeah, pandemic's, a good thing, but for us, in terms of integration, it just forced a lot. Everybody's adapting to technology, just like all of you, but all those meetings that would have been having people fly across the country were occurring a lot more rapidly, which was a really helpful thing for all of us. There's definitely been challenges along the way that in terms of integration and integrating new people and getting to know each other. We didn't get to do all the things that we would usually do with that. But the beauty of this is we kind of had the ability to create this new culture, which, we don't really have a name for it, but certainly I think everybody can relate to the fact that everybody has a lot more empathy, and everybody has a lot more empathy for us, not only because we've gone through the combination, but the pandemic, a lot of checking in on each other, and a lot of people feeling like we're all kind of in it together. So it has been different. We've had to kind of combine mindsets, and we're all coming from a different place when you combine a different firm, but thankfully culturally it's really lined up well.
And I would say from our perspective, we're still in we have a few offices where we had overlap. So our New York office, our DC office, our Orange County office. In Orange County, there was enough space to accommodate all of our attorneys into one of those two offices. But in the DC and the New York offices, we've really had to think about how will we be able to fit everybody, because right now we do not want to take on additional real estate costs. So I think it's forcing us to consider hoteling even sooner than we might have before. And actually, we have combined our New York City office, and like John said, I think that was a little bit easier than it would have been, because they were doing it during the pandemic, and most people have not shown up to that office. But we also surveyed both New York and DC to find out whether people were open to the concept of hoteling, whether they were interested in hoteling and giving up their permanent office. We had both of those are areas where the commute times are really long, so we actually had pretty good take up, and it was enough to in both cases it's enough to be able to fit everybody into one of the larger offices in both cities. So I guess the outstanding question is, once we come back to the office, we actually have to have this hoteling system working. And so I believe that this is probably a part of the firm's future, but we still haven't, we're kind of in sub-beta testing at this point, and we really need to come back to the office in a fuller capacity before we can really know what works and what doesn't, and be able to tweak it.
Joseph, real quick here. I was going to say, just to mirror your comments a little bit, we're kind of in the same place where we're actually working with IA on our Chicago build out. We're going to the BMO tower over there, so combining offices. And then in DC, it's kind of the same, where we had two offices. We thought, well, we're going to go to one of these spaces because we want to integrate our folks physically, but we're definitely going to need another floor. It's like immediately when the pandemic hit, we started understanding we could work from home. That thought kind of went out there, and now it's all about, let's make sure we fit that space we have. Let's make sure we get a program that's right. Same thing on surveying, which I'm sure we'll all talk about in a little bit. We were really surprised in a good way of how many people are really willing to try something new. And certainly there are folks that aren't, but there are a lot of folks that are willing to be kind of adaptive and think about hoteling and being creative so we can be smarter with real estate.
That's very exciting to hear, John. And I'm sure that was probably one of the hurdles that crossed everyone's mind at the beginning of the pandemic. How will we adjust, and how receptive will people be? You all had, each of you had mentioned that you do have some people going in. Who is going in, and why do you think that they are going back to or going into the office?
I mean, this is in terms of our folks. I go into the office because I'm managing projects, so there's a need for me to actually physically be there to oversee or manage construction. I certainly have only done that in DC. I haven't traveled since last February. But the attorneys and support folks we have going in, some of them are practice specific. I just happen to sit with the wills and trust practice group on my floor, and they've come in because they have a lot of documents and originals they have to either they were being sent to their home and they felt there was a liability there, so they had to bring them into the office. Or we have attorneys that have to go in and get case files. And in rare occasions, not just in Washington, but I've heard that that some technology may not be fully supported at people's homes, so they may have to go in to do a specific type of deposition or meeting to where they need access to one of our conference rooms. So it's very, very limited. People maybe go in to retrieve mail or do a copy job, but it's very, very limited firm-wide right now. It's almost on a need to go in basis as opposed to.
Yeah, we've had the same experience, and it varies quite a bit. Back to the discussion around location. If you have a long commute, you get far less people in the office. When it's difficult to get in the office, unless you have a specific reason for being there, whether it's getting ready for a case or looking up documents that you have to come in the office, or facility people are obviously there more often to make sure they maintain operations.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So we're a little bit different, but very similar. We're not requiring anybody to come in, and most of our offices are still closed, but we do have a handful of them that are open. We've got 6 or 7 that are open where you could come in. And with that, we're tracking, we're doing the attestations like I'm sure everybody else is to make sure people that come in are healthy. So when we track that, we've got, even if people could come in, they have the ability to do so. We see somewhere around 10, 15% in every single office. So, people aren't really wanting to come in, and it's for the same reasons that were mentioned earlier. There's some kind of court-ordered activity or need something special that day. Then, of course, there's some people that really like the routine and need a printer or whatever it might be, but it's few and far between, even when they're allowed to come in. The office isn't closed.
I think we had some offices that opened into phase 1 of our, we've got a 3-phase approach. And I think that in a lot of those offices, people were surprised by how few people did show up. And I think part of it is, you do need some critical mass of folks to be in the office to make it a worthwhile space. And if you're going to the office to collaborate, no one's there, you're not getting what you needed from it. So I think that's been a challenge. But we, in a lot of our offices, even ones that are kind of officially closed, there's oftentimes 10% of people or attorneys who may come in. Obviously, that number may be lower in certain places like New York, but there are, our wills and trust group, that's just a paper intensive, need to be their group. We've got some multifamily housing groups that just it's also very paper intensive. So in those cases, it's harder for them to work remotely. And I expect that, practice, those will be the practices that come back fullest, earliest.
I will say from a real estate perspective, it's been a huge advantage to us in real estate working on projects, because there are plenty of projects going on, and not having people around and not having to phase work has been a huge benefit.
It's a cost savings. I agree, Paul. It's 100%. We have yield savings in multiple markets by not having to work off hours or do a bunch of extraordinary measures. So we make a lot of noise and a lot of dust.
Lowering operating expenses too.
Exactly.
Well, certainly there are tactical and pragmatic advantages to remote working. On an intangible level, how do you all feel the culture of your firms will be impacted by a continuation of remote working as part of your culture?
That's a difficult question to answer.
Best guess.
I think, look, people, our employees have really grown used to, and I think everybody has grown used to collaborating through, whether, video conference calls. I think it's a little more natural than it used to be. So, some of the cultural aspects are still there, through, what I would call a double-edged sword, right? Because there's increased collaboration by way of having easy video call conference meetings, whatever you call them. But on the other hand, it's still not the same as meeting in person. You lose that, that body language. You lose those side conversations that you really typically don't find in video conference calls. So, while we probably collaborate more and we have an easier time meeting with people, we do it in a very different fashion that I don't think long term is comfortable, on an ongoing, consistent basis. So I think it's a balance. I think it's a balance of both. The other thing too is I think that we're actually probably a little more productive, and we work longer hours, working remotely, which is good and bad. I think we need, as human beings, we need a defining line between work and being at home, and we've lost that, through this remote work experience.
Yeah, I would say, culturally, I'm very proud of the way that, our firm is able to continue with training, continue with, with events for every major holiday. We were able to host a remote event. So it was some sort of continuation of cultural in a virtual world. Productivity, I would agree. People not having to spend time on the roads commuting, were converted into productive work hours. But I do think that probably the biggest challenge, and I'm sure all of everybody on the call can sympathize with, is new hires. You integrate these folks into a new place of employment. It's hard to make that cultural and professional connection via Zoom or via conference call. So I think people are eager to get back and have that personal connection, and especially to be able to work with their peers face-to-face basis.
I think there's also a lot of concern about associates and how associates become part of the law firm.
Yes.
It's almost like an apprenticeship program the way it's currently set up. But if they don't get that personal connection and get to know the way things are done at the firm, and it's all done remotely, I think there's a risk there. And I don't know that we've really figured out how is that going to be impacted long term when we do go back. When I've talked to office administrators about how to plan for the return to work, and office managing partners, I talk to them and say, I think we need to plan for you're going to have to be more flexible than you were about how people can work, but I think there's also going to need to be, you're going to have expectations for different individuals based on their position within the firm, and I think that's going to be a work in progress over the next few years to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with everybody here. I don't think that there's like a real magic answer, and I'm in the same page with you all that I'm really proud of our firm. There's just been incredible effort to make sure that we're staying together and connected, that we're all checking on each other and well-being. As I mentioned earlier, it's just become central in the firm, which is wonderful. It's kind of that next step, what happens, right? I think we all need to think about what does an agile workforce look like and kind of what are the parameters around that. There's definitely, it's hard to generalize and say, well, we think a lot of people are going to want to come back and it's just going to snap your fingers and be a little bit different, but pretty much the same. I don't know if that's the case. I think you'll have a lot of people that, if you look at the surveys, at least for us, are saying, I'd really rather just stay home forever. And what's the answer to that? I ultimately think it gets back to real estate a little bit, where you start planning a little bit differently. You just need to have, different spaces for different needs. You're gonna have some people who want to pop in and have some co-working space. Some people want more quiet space, but would get out of there. Some people are okay hoteling, and some people want the traditional models. Like, how do you blend it all and how do you get policy around it? I think it's a big open question for a lot of law firms.
Absolutely. And so, John, you mentioned earlier in our talk that you all are at the very beginnings of your project in Chicago, and you just mentioned some of the things that could be incorporated. Have you all started to talk seriously about any of those?
Yeah, we have, and we've got a really nice design committee that's made up of some operational people, but certainly some lawyer leadership as well. And everybody seems to be in lockstep that we need these different types of spaces and to invest in them. And it's really kind of whether it's sort of open collaborative spaces, or again, like I said, what the attorneys are telling us is the co-working spaces are great, but you also need that heads down space. It'd be great for some people personally to not be in the office, but when they come in, maybe they don't need to have an office, but they could go to some space that is just, really quiet, and that's sort of a quiet zone. So we're kind of creating all these different spaces and concept, and just going to see how it plays out. But it feels a little bit like we're on the precipice of it. It's exciting, but it's also brand new to everyone. Within that, we're also going to go back to the surveying that we talked about earlier to see the space that we took. Do we need all of it? And if we kind of create these spaces, we allow some people to work from home, does that all of a sudden look a little different? All that's being discussed now, but certainly your team, Buzz, is doing a great job in helping us think about those type of things.
That's great to hear. Great to hear. Is anyone else rethinking, or do you have any real estate projects coming up that you're starting to say, you know what, before we get started, let's talk about this? Paul, I think you had mentioned that you all had started to reconsider some things.
Yeah, we actually have a pretty long list. So, we had talked a little bit about mergers and acquisitions. We've been doing a lot of lateral hiring and just hiring in general, where we've had to look at expansion. We have a couple locations around the country where we're doing nothing more than putting a hoteling program in place rather than looking for expansion space. I mean, there's just a huge awareness from leadership on bottom line and real estate costs these days, which I think is great for us. I mean, if we didn't have a seat at the table before, we certainly do now. But we've actually put into plan 3 locations around the country. And I'll start with the earliest that we started early last spring, and the timing just worked out with COVID. It kind of helped the cause, but we had a location in our country where we had 2 offices in the same city, and we decided to consolidate. We were about 55,000 square feet between the 2 offices, and now we're down to we consolidated into one office, 36,000 square feet, and we are actually in CDs right now in planning for that consolidation, which includes hoteling and office sharing. So new to us, it's all based on surveys. We have agreement. We actually set up some office sharing between attorneys, based on those surveys and the willingness to, exchange days. So hopefully it'll work out, and we're very excited about it. The second project was where we had a lease renewal coming up, And our managing partner was very supportive of the fact that we were highly remote in that location, even pre-COVID. But spent a lot of time on surveys again. And, I think it's pretty consistent across the board, and you guys can chime in, but it looks, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 60% of the workforce is looking to come in at post-COVID 2 to 3 days a week. So we looked at those numbers and we planned in this location for downsizing. We just signed a new lease, and we're going from 47,000 square feet down to 31,000 square feet. Again, requires hoteling, and hoteling as we grow, expand that workforce, we're going to have to hotel a little harder. I think there's some benefit now, obviously, with COVID and people working remotely, that we have time to adjust to that. We have time to integrate the technology. And then as time goes on, look, we always have a fallback position. There's despite what many of our clients believe, there's always expansion space available, and there will be. So if we get into a bind down the road, fine, we'll look to expand, brick and mortar expansion. But for now, the plan is really to grow using hoteling and office sharing. And then we have a new office that's opening up too, where we didn't have an office before. And same thing, we're going into the planning for that new office, working on a lease draft right now, where we're significantly lower in our square foot per attorney than we normally would be. So pretty excited about all these things, and I think we've gotten really good support and growing support from the offices in terms of alternative planning. And again, my background is in the financial services sector, and we've been doing this for a long time. So really, our focus is, why are people coming in the office, and when they come in the office, what are they looking for? And I think there's a balance between additional collaborative space that we didn't have in the past, and still that need for individual office, for working heads down space.
Great, thank you.
I'll say, I think that another aspect of this is considering how are you going to use the space that you already have, and rather than dealing with the in the build out process, we have cut back on the number of offices that we're building in the one new office that we're building out in Charlotte. But in our Richmond office, we're considering, we're growing, but we do not want to add additional real estate, and we don't want to build out new offices when we think that we can handle things through hoteling. But I think there's a large staff function in that office, and right now they're kind of spread out all over the floors with cubicles and interior offices and different things. And just yesterday, I was having a conversation with the office managing partner and office administrator about that location, and talking about, maybe there are different ways that we can set this up so that maybe some of these administrative staff members, maybe they don't get assigned offices, but maybe we have collaborative spaces where they can come to work together when they need to work in the office. And maybe there's a marketing room or a business development room or whatever it is. And then, but then for their heads down work, why do we need to provide a workstation for that? Maybe they can do that at home. And so I think we're not sure exactly what that's going to look like yet, but I think we're starting to ask a lot of those questions. And it may not be possible for all staff members, but certainly, that's the function that you never really, it's always kind of jammed in somewhere in the law firm office space. And so kind of rethinking that, maybe we can get better space for staff that's more functional for them.
Yeah, and Joseph and Paul, kind of add on to what you all said. I was in an office leader meeting yesterday with all the different office leaders. And in the past, it's something we really tiptoed around, talking about space, and because anybody, there's certain feelings of pride within the space that we built out. Well, now it's almost like there's still that pride, but everybody's reading it and everybody knows what's going on. So you're getting it proactively from the office, from every level, the office leaders, the executives. Folks are wondering what we're going to do and if we're going to shift, if we're thinking about it. But everybody appears to be supportive, which for me is kind of a new and exciting thing. I think probably for all of us, we've got a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll just add briefly that in terms of efficient use of space, I stepped into the firm in 2018, kind of coming on the heels of a merger. The firm went through with Case Scholler, and there was already this push to be as efficient as possible. So our approach is kind of threefold. I guess first, we're looking at future leases to be as efficient as we can in terms of our program requirements, and the firm has already somewhat embraced the single size office concept. We did that in our Denver office, so that we were able to effectively add more offices for effectively the same amount of square feet that we were leasing before. So we got more efficient there, and I think COVID has accelerated a lot of these changes in the marketplace that have really taken hold in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of office space and office utilization. The second part is to build into those new leases flexibility, whether that be expansion options, as Paul mentioned, or contraction options. To me, those are just as important. The ability to adjust down if you have to, which we benefit from in many of our leases. In terms of the future, I agree. I don't know if anybody knows exactly what that's going to look like, but I could see a combination of some hoteling for the professional staff. I don't know if we've gone that far with attorneys yet, but certainly less square footage per office, more flexibility in our space needs, and just a harder look at our program. And when we're doing changes on existing leases right now, we've already started to look at ways to adapt that workspace. We were doing it pre-COVID, and certainly we've done it a lot more post-COVID.
Great. So, gentlemen, there's been, I'm sure that we've all seen the articles on the migration from our larger urban cores during the pandemic, where population centers are starting to see a migration into the suburbs as well as the exurbs. And along those lines, there have been discussions around the hub and spoke model of real estate. Do any of you foresee that becoming something that, whether it's in the short term or the long term, implemented within your organizations, where you may have a core office within the urban center, but you have facilities on the rings of these urban cores?
We, meaning the firm had some of those instances in different markets years ago and actually moved away from it. I think one of the challenges now is access to public transportation, and that's one of the benefits of an urban location prior to COVID. It's also one of the challenges now, getting people back in the office if they depend on public transportation. But I certainly think it's a strategy people may be looking at. But there again, I tie it back to our lease expiration dates. It may be a great idea, but if we're not looking to take on more space, more leases, while we still have leases that have term left on it, is that the right way to approach it? Certainly in certain markets it may be beneficial, but I think you're always going to have to look at public transportation, commuting. Even the exurbs now have traffic issues, and cost of living and talent, the availability of talent. Those are all to me.
Chris, I would add to that, talent's really important too, right? Demographics, and I think the younger generations tend to be in the more the CBD area, the urban areas. So we really don't have any holistic plans to move outside of CBD locations. However, there are some specific incidents where if the political environment or crime or even taxation is getting out of hand, that we are looking to balance it out with the possibility of a hub and spoke type of situation. It wouldn't be across the board, it would just be very specific. But the other point I'll touch on that we discussed earlier is for the staffing models, looking at our HQ staffing models, that we are considering moving some of the staffing not only to remote work hoteling situation, but possibly locating not necessarily an operations center, but other areas where if there's a lower cost basis to operate centralized operations teams like IT, finance, marketing, HR, outside of those CBD locations.
I would just say that I think our firm isn't looking at the hub and spoke model per se. We have a few suburban offices that already exist, and I think that in general, the way that we operate, we're a service organization. You know, we're providing service for our clients, and it's probably most important for our firm to be close to where our clients are and close to where our clients expect to be and where they can get to meetings easily. And I think that's why a lot of times it's in a core business district location. Although, you know, we do have some offices that are in other markets, and you know, that's probably also because that's where our clients happen to be. So I think for us, a lot of times those location decisions are driven by talent, but also by where our clients are. You know, and then just quickly on what Paul mentioned about the locating staff, you know, or maybe a offsite staff location. I think, you know, we considered that when we were building out our Atlanta office and decided, given prices in Atlanta at that time, that it made more sense to try to co-locate everybody. I do think that, you know, pricing in Atlanta is probably less expensive than in some other major cities. You know, it probably still makes sense to have a lot of these operations located here. But, you know, I do think that we might, if we were going to think about giving up office space, you know, we structured our lease in a way that we could give back, you know, maybe one of the 2 administrative floors that we have if we wanted to operate more efficiently within, you know, within our existing space. So that's, you know, a possibility down the road, depending on how things go.
Yeah, it's the same with us. When we're in the central business districts, we're generally there because it's a strategic move and to be closer to clients, and we would stay there at least for now. Of course, we want to be agile for the future, but that is what we're thinking now. Now, I guess kind of a hybrid version of what you mentioned there, Joseph, is in our Minneapolis office a few years ago, we just redid our lease, and so we have our kind of Class A building that we stayed. We kept our lawyers in our conference center, but then they're right across the street. There's kind of, I guess, a lower rent area, and that's where we put an operations center. So everybody still has access to each other, but we just kind of took the administrative folks over there. Now, of course, we're still looking at what do we do in the long term. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't have policy set around that. But what I will say is in the surveys, certainly it's almost like 95% of the operations professionals are saying we prefer to stay at home forever. So what does that mean? Do the firms that have kind of moved to this operations center where you have this kind of physical place where lots of people are, can you just do that remotely in the future? It's just something I think that's for consideration down the road.
That's a great segue to the next question I want to pose to the group. You know, there's been a great deal of focus as well on Zoom fatigue, work from home fatigue, pandemic fatigue. People are longing to be back with other people. What do you think, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the key reasons that attorneys and staff would want to return to the office? John, I'll let you take it from where you left off.
Yeah, so I mean, it's sort of the same things that we've talked about, and it just falls into different buckets. One is service to clients, and it's been really hard for us to say no, or we always say yes, and it's been really one of the hardest parts of my job personally is that when clients have been wanting to come into the office, to be the person that says, we can't do that right now for safety reasons. I think that for the most part, we just can't wait to welcome clients back and of course be safe within that, into our conference centers. That will be a big thing. And of course, it's collaboration. We built a lot of our space out, and really in the last like 7 years, we built out 4 of our spaces. And it's all a bit about collaboration, and it's really kind of worked out. So we've got this really great capability that's out there, and it's taking advantage of it. So I think there's that. Of course, there's routine, there's people. The social aspect of it's huge. And then like we touched on earlier, the integration, it's really hard to integrate people through Zoom. I think we're seeing that on the attorney side, but definitely the operations side of things too, which I guess goes against my earlier point I just made, but it can be done, of course. It's definitely a major challenge, and it's just a lot different. So I think that those are some of the main reasons people want to get back into the office, is just that sense of camaraderie, integration, and collaboration.
Great, thank you. Joseph?
Well, I guess I would say that, yeah, I think that certainly Zoom fatigue and wanting to get back in the office, I think people want to collaborate. I do think that, you know, we've talked about it before. When we do get back to the office, I think we're going to need to be more flexible, and there's going to be more mixed meetings where some people are participating via video and some people aren't. I don't think we've completely thought that out yet, but, you know, I've been trying to push our IT department to think about what kind of conference rooms do we need and what kind of setups do we need to have in them to allow for meetings where, you know, maybe 4 people are in person, but, you know, 3 of them are off site. And, you know, the experience, I'm sure we've all experienced it, being the remote person, you know, dialed in or on the video call of a meeting where everyone else was sitting there in person, and what a bad experience that is. And I think that we need to figure out ways to make those mixed experiences of collaboration better. And I think that's going to be a big challenge over the next few years that I don't think any of us are really, or at least I know we have not really started tackling yet, but I think it's going to become an issue.
I would echo those comments. I think professional development and training and integration with a practice group is probably a number one for the young associates and for the senior partners. There's a lot of experience there that just can't be conveyed via Zoom. So I think there is a need for that personal professional connection to really help folks develop, not just on the attorney level, but also the staff level. You know, we've been very successful at integrating new employees, you know, in terms of getting them set up with benefits and technology. That's, to me, the easy part. But I think it's the long-term approach to get back in the office, even if it's just as Joseph mentioned, for, you know, 2 or 3 days a week. I think those are just going to be important days, and to make sure those align with your coworkers. You know, it really does no good if you're in the office when the team you need to collaborate is not. So I think there's going to be a little bit of challenge of scheduling groups to come in together, but I think that just an eagerness to get back, and you read stories about people kind of missing their commute time, even though they hated it. You know, there was a time to listen to a podcast or a book, or just listen to music, or just, you know, decompress. So trust me, I don't miss an hour and 45-minute commute. But, you know, until it's gone, you don't really realize how, you know, that was part of your workday. And but
right.
I think it's the cultural blend of bringing. Yeah.
Putting aside just fatigue, I think there's a sense of well-being, and even though everybody hates their commute, they still love it at the same time. Just getting out of the house and being able to come in the office, I think you feel more professional. I mean, this is just so monochromatic, you know, to be in front of a Zoom call all the time and be in the same environment. It's, you know, I think that mix is going to be very desirable, to have, you know, a few days in the office, a few days at home, where you get that balance of the benefits of any of that.
Well, as a New Yorker, I can tell you, if we're not happy unless we're complaining about our commute. So I welcome it back. So we are at our question and answer period. So I am going to share. Let's see if I can do this.
You got it.
Okay, so I think I have, so our first question, do you anticipate people being reluctant to come back to the office? If so, what are your strategies for getting them back? Are you modifying your space?
Let me start, because I think that I'm not expecting there to be a big return to the office until vaccinations are much more widespread. You know, I think a lot of people are just not going to be comfortable coming into the office, being in a tight elevator, getting up to the space, you know, doing all of that. You know, I also think that we've learned a lot about the virus over the last year, and we know it's more about airflow and social distancing in terms of keeping people from contracting it or trying to mitigate that. And, you know, I know there's a lot of focus on surfaces and plexiglass barriers. I think we've put plexiglass in some places like the reception areas, you know, maybe a few work areas. But for the most part, you know, we have really focused more on, you know, how is it going to be after people get back. And, you know, I think that we're relying on vaccinations to help with that process.
I would say, at least I can only speak for Washington, D.C., but I would expect there's probably some reluctance, but some of that there again may be outside of the control of the firm. Meaning, if there's a reluctance to really get on public transportation, if that's your primary mode of getting to the office, that's your reluctance. It may not be your reluctance to go to the office. It may be just how you get there, and some of it may be, you know, grounded in, you know, if they still have school-age children that are home, and maybe the schools are not adapting as quickly as, say, the work, you know, you may not be able to come back in the same way. So I think there's going to be a reluctance, but I think you, as Joseph mentioned, you have to make the built environment, the physical environment, you know, you have to prove to them that you've taken the steps, which we have. You know, we're ready for people to come back between the, you know, the social distancing and the wayfinding and the sanitation stations and kind of the spacing. You know, we've hopefully planned for a lot of that already. So I agree. The efficacy of the vaccine will help hopefully get a lot of people convinced and confident. But you know, and maybe part of it's just kind of giving people a little bit more time, you know, to make that decision. That may get over the reluctance.
Yeah, I agree with all that too. It's for us. It's really, we've got the plan out there as well. It's got 3 different phases, and we'll continue to adjust it. But it's really getting ahead of it so people know. You know, we don't have a lot of offices in phase 1 right now, but the ones that do, hey, it's going pretty well, and we're sticking to that plan. And we only have like 15% of the people. We probably change that threshold as we go to different phases, and we have our office administrators who are sort of monitoring all that and making sure that, you know, if we get over that threshold, that we're doing the right things to stay distance, it's clean, it's safe. We're really kind of transparent with people when there's COVID in the office, make sure that people know just what's going on. So a lot of it's transparency. Then it's kind of just a little bit of a slow roll of just the encouragement versus the requiring, and ultimately getting there down the road once we know more about vaccinations.
So John, you sort of started to answer the next question that we have around the comfort level of people in offices. And so one of our participants asked, in a co-working or open environment, is anyone modifying their space for a return to the office where the concern of COVID or another virus will continue to worry people? With office desk sharing, how do you deal with the concerns of sanitizing between use?
Yeah, well, go ahead.
I'll take that one. So in terms of planning for offices where we're able to make changes, we have made some changes. Individual offices are not an issue. Obviously, you know, when you collaborate, there were considerations in terms of creating some additional social distancing. One area that we hit pretty hard on some recent designs was like in LPA stations, where we redesigned the way that if we had two LPA workstations together, how they were accessed and how people would sit in there so they have more social distance or more privacy. In terms of, you know, previously, you know, the designs were such that you know, you could have multiple people coming in and out or on top of each other. So we really considered that. I also want to take the office sharing question and how we prepare. So we are looking at office sharing in some of our locations. However, just to be clear, that's not sharing an office at the same time. That's sharing an office at different times. And we will have protocols in place for cleaning those offices. Same with conference rooms. Working on hoteling reservation scheduling, you know, policy right now, and we're you know, leaving approximately an hour or 2 in between meetings so those rooms can come in and be taken care of, cleaned before anybody else can use those spaces. So we're definitely looking at that.
Yeah.
Paul, do you see that service being something that is done by the firm, or do you see the building janitorial services providing that service to you?
Yeah, we're not relying on the building services. I mean, you know, we have our standard cleaning, and we have had enhanced cleaning for COVID protocol. However, you know, in terms of cleaning out conference rooms and other work areas internally, that's going to be done by our, you know, our support groups, administration, staffing. on a regular schedule.
As we have not made wholesale changes to our space, we had a few projects that were in design and implemented during COVID. A few things we did do. We had excess file space, and I'm sure all of you can speak to kind of the reduction in paper files. So we converted what were high density files that were not being used into additional private enclosed offices. So it gave people more opportunity. We have more opportunities to if you do come in to work in kind of an enclosed area. We've had very few areas that have densified workstations. They may be our help desk areas or some of our business resources. So we've, the help desk, we were able to kind of work remotely. We were able to reduce densities by having some people work remotely versus maybe be in the office. But for planning for when people do come back, we looked at more furniture options instead of having, say, furniture with lower panels with people either side by side closely or facing each other. Maybe we reduced our density, got a few less stations, but we're able to raise the panels and have them, face in a different direction. So they didn't feel like they were right across. So we've made minor tweaks, but we have not made wholesale changes because, quite frankly, we don't really have enough of the information to make a wholesale change. We've thought about it, try to reduce densities where we can, you use shift work as an option where we do have people that are by position in a dense environment, but we decided, to not invest a bunch of capital until we had better information.
Great. So another question from one of our participants, and we did talk a little bit about this earlier. Will your real estate portfolios include co-working spaces in the future?
Yeah, we're certainly, I would say just in general, what I've heard from my peers and in discussions that, rather than trying to downsize space or reconfigure, space, really, I think the big push is going to be what do we do in terms of what we do in the future is trying to grow in the space we have rather than taking expansion space. And certainly one of the fallbacks is to have that co-working space available to us in case we run out of space and we don't have an expansion option, or we don't want to invest long term in a lease obligation. That co-working space is certainly an option. The trick here, I think, also is that a lot of co-working spaces are not designed for legal environments, law offices. However, I think there's a growing sector of those co-working spaces that are catering to more upscale individual offices, and we're doing some work right now with a couple of those co-working firms. I see that area of co-working growing to meet those needs.
We had actually, right the year before COVID hit, we were searching for a new location for our San Francisco office, and one of the avenues I explored was co-working, but what Paul mentioned, there weren't any providers that could offer the type of space that we needed. We actually ended up subleasing from Arnold & Porter, Chris's firm, which is great space. But I think the great thing about co-working would be that it would offer flexibility, especially if you have a smaller office or one that you think is going to grow a lot, or one that you're not really sure what its trajectory is going to be, and you don't want to make a long-term commitment, but you need a certain type of space for the level of client, level of attorneys that you're trying to attract. And I think in those cases, if you can find the right co-working space, it would be great. But I think there's still a lot of markets where they're not catering to the legal market, unfortunately.
And even from our side, we're seeing a lot more of an engagement of companies that develop co-working spaces going to co-working for grown-ups, if you will. It's beyond the millennial generation, and they are sort of upgrading and trying to appeal to a different audience at this point. So I agree, Paul. I think you said you're starting to see more of that. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I may have written the next two questions for you. So are you seeing long-term changes in metrics between attorney and staff, that is paralegals, associates, and admin support? And I'm going to combine a couple of questions regarding square footage. Do you have a model for the ideal square footage per attorney prior to now looking at reduced footprints, and how are you evaluating? It's a lot of words, I know. So why don't we talk about the metrics? Are you seeing any long-term changes in metrics between attorneys and administrative staff or even legal staff?
We're absolutely looking at our metrics around square footage, and you know, just looking at an industry-wide basis. We look at, you know, the reports that come out from the big real estate firms every year, and you know, we were not so good at our metrics, but we've certainly headed in the right direction. I think that, you know, industry-wide, you know, it varies so much. It can be anywhere from 500 square foot per attorney up to 1,000. And, you know, we were in some of our older offices, we were up near the top there, but we've our newer office that we're, you know, we just actually passed standards policy with our leadership team. And, you know, our policy now, our standards are at anywhere between, you know, 450 and 550 square foot per attorney. So we're really pushing that number down quite a bit.
Well, those are numbers that you haven't heard in the past.
They're very aggressive, and they do include, you know, some hoteling. You know, it's a pledge from our leadership that they're supporting, you know, this new environment, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, I would say from a kind of future design, a current and future design perspective, what I have found is, you know, is we've slowly embraced this become, you know, even quicker with COVID is the idea of a single size office. So defining that square footage standard is important. So you know, I'll use our Denver office for example. You know, we considered staying versus going. And when we looked at, you know, the condition of the existing building, which was a fine building we'd been in for forever, you know, we elected to kind of go to a newer high performance building with different mullion spacing that allowed us to maximize the number of perimeter offices around the building. So we were able to offer, you know, more offices on the perimeter, smaller than what they were traditionally built out in the prior building, but augment it with furniture. So if some of the, you know, the requirements where I want to be able to have a meeting in my office with associates is augment the furniture to kind of adapt to some of the smaller footprint. So, you know, and make sure you integrate technology. You know, we're all, you know, dual screen users now. We're able to provide 100% sit-stand option for the desks. Ample storage, even though paper storage is continually going down, but be able to provide options for storage. So, you know, we look at it from a design standpoint, looking at the building. If we have the opportunity to look at a building, make sure that we can accommodate as many offices at the right size, but also look at our furniture design. And I know, Buzz, you'll appreciate that, is how can you really give people the same you know, ability to store and host a small meeting in their space. Now, certainly you're going to lose your couch, you're going to lose maybe your lectern or your, you know, your grandfather's desk. We can't accommodate that, but I think there's a real push and a real desire to you know, to reduce the square footage and still get a lot of the amenities that you need to practice.
Yeah, Christopher, I agree with that too. In our last 3 build outs, we moved to similar size offices. We already had in some of the offices, but it was a real push to get there. And we started out with like the specific office sizes. It went from 170 square foot and 150 in our latest. We're getting closer to talk about individual office sizes, 130, 140 square foot. And it's actually getting easier now with the pandemic because people get it. So I think that sell is a little bit not as challenging as it once was, which is helpful with all that. The other thing, just on the staffing question, you know, I think that there will definitely be change. I mean, the one thing that I think that the pandemic is going to help with is that I hope carries over is you don't need to have somebody right in front of you. You can work cross office. And so before, where we had issues of, does the administrative assistant need to be on the same floor? Is it okay if they're down the hallway or on a different floor? And that was a big conversation. Now you can say, hey, we lived for a year and they weren't even in the same zip code. So we can probably do this cross office. You know, we know long term that I think across the industry that there's administrative assistants, something like 65-70% will be retired in the next 10 years. So of course we're thinking, how does that all play into strategy in the future, and how do we kind of, you know, promote cross office work and do a little bit more with fewer people if we can over time.
When you are talking to landlords in the future, or even now if you're starting to have those conversations, are there discussions around what the building landlord or the building owner can do to better support your goals, like through upgrades such as air filtration systems? Or do you think that's something that it's going to fall back onto all of you?
Hey, Buzz, really quick too. I think we hit the 1 o'clock mark. So do you want
Oh, we
to
did.
make a statement about that?
Yes, thank you. I'm having so much fun. I wasn't even watching the clock. So we are at 1 o'clock. I think we are able to extend for a few more minutes if everyone would like to go on, because we do have a lot of questions, and those we don't get to, we will certainly work towards getting some answers out to all of you. Gentlemen, if it's okay, do you want to stay on for maybe another 10 or 15 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So going back to the question on the landlord and in negotiating leases, are you looking at building upgrades or even tenant office upgrades before you start to before you sign a lease?
I would say, Buzz, if you're in lease negotiations or building evaluation mode, I think tenants have a lot of leverage right now to go ahead and at least, it'd be difficult to force a landlord to remove an air handler to put in a new one if they don't already have, adequate filtering. But I do think that this is an opportunity to build into those negotiations, at least planned upgrades or possible upgrades on air handling, on filtration, on water, restroom operating expenses, how you're going to handle cleaning. I think those are all negotiable points now. And actually, I think landlords are going to have to kind of up their game to attract tenants, because those are all questions that I'm sure all the brokers will be pushing upon with all landlords that are marketing to tenants.
Yeah, I also think that it has a big impact on our selection process. I think we're looking at newer buildings that can accommodate those systems or have built those systems in place. We've been fortunately looking at a couple new buildings that have actually reconfigured during COVID to increase their filtration systems and other areas of the building that are impacted by COVID.
So along those lines, I'm sure you all are familiar with the WELL certification that has become preeminent in design and build outs. Do you foresee your firms pursuing WELL certification for your new offices, or at the very least in increasing the wellness strategies that you incorporate into your workplace? Joseph, I'll start with you.
I would say that I do think, as Paul and Chris referred to, I think that in new leases, we'll be looking for certain filtration, certain standards, how the airflow is, trying to look at some of those things. I'm not sure if the WELL standard has filtered into the legal market yet. And, I think I would need to hear more of the research about some of the findings, because it seems like some of it may be still in development, and I know a lot of architects are kind of selling that service, but it hasn't struck us as important as sustainability and some other features.
We're certainly doing a lot internally in terms of business resilience and looking at our own, policies and procedures for wellness, and not necessarily relying on the building. I think we're kind of taking matters in the hand, but agree. I mean, we'll see how things flush out in the future.
Yeah, I'd say we're more
sorry.
striving. It's just more of a striving situation for us, but I'd echo exactly what Paul said. This is more of an internal effort for us versus when we're working with the building.
So Paul, I have a very specific question for you. One of our participants was listening and said you reduced 34% of office space in 2 locations. In your example, one by 19,000, the other by 16,000. What did you eliminate? What did you downsize?
Yeah, so it's a combination of two things, right? It's first of all, it's looking at pre-COVID remote working. What are the show up rates? Right? Because I doubt there's anybody out there that can walk into an office and, putting aside COVID, pre-COVID, and look at the space and say that we're 100% occupied, that everybody's in the office all the time. So we took that into account. We also took hoteling into account, and we're not hoteling everybody all the time. You have to, there's art and science that come together with hoteling, and you're never going to get it just right if you rely on the numbers. So there's a buffer there. So we looked at both of those show up rates, and also relied on a certain level of hoteling to reduce the rates. And I think that given my experience in the financial sector and doing this for a long time, again, I think there's a certain amount of art to this, but I think that with the proper amount of buffer, that those numbers are completely realistic, and I think we'll be fine for the foreseeable future.
So to all of you, one of our questions is, do you have your reception areas open? I assume not, but how do you see this working in the future? And by open, I think the question is, are they functioning today? Are people able to come in and see you?
I would say, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say our offices are effectively closed for visitors and others, so we don't have our reception areas are not open per se.
Chris, any thoughts around? I'm sorry. I was just, if you all could add what you see in the future, how it might work in I guess probably more in the short term in terms of still having to deal with COVID.
Well, I would say that it's the path of travel. So just, I'll use our DC building as an example, and I'm sure this applies to many other buildings. There again, you come into the building, there's a check-in process at the front desk in order to get to our floors, to our reception areas. So you may go through some sort of protocols there. If that may include masks, it may include a health affirmation form or some sort of other check-in procedure. And then certainly when you get on the elevator, it may be less folks that ride on the elevator at any one time. And when you come into a reception area, it may be, instead of kind of waiting and clustering in one area, that they may try to spread people out. We really haven't thought or implemented that level of detail, but those are just things that I could see potentially happening. And our hope would be that when guests and visitors and clients do return to the office, it's after people are somewhat back to a more normal operating procedure. Still cautionary, but hopefully not as many hurdles to go through.
We do have some situations where we have offices where, for whatever reason, we need clients to come for a deposition or for some other, to sign a will or whatever they need to do. And in most of our offices, we actually do have the receptionist still coming in and staffing that desk. I think that, right now there's just, like Chris mentioned, a lot more steps in terms of what you need to do to get into the office. But for a lot of our offices, even pre-COVID, you still had to register and go through a security process. So I don't think that's really changing. It's just how many people are we going to register at a time? Right now, it's a handful versus probably will be a lot more liberal when COVID is no longer a huge issue.
And we also, we don't have receptionists that are in, and even our office I mentioned earlier, we've got 5 or 6 that are open. We've still kept the receptions kind of out of play just to be careful. In those cases, we've generally, if an attorney's having a client in, they're responsible for the welcoming. We've kind of prepared them. We've got a little bit of a kit of what they're supposed to do, make sure they're distant. Before the client comes in, they're filling out the attestation, and they have it. We have masks available, all of that. I think in the future, at some point, receptionists do come back in, but we're just, for a long time, when that becomes normal, we'll have, I could just picture kind of a little bit of a barrier, something along those lines, making sure we're socially distant. And we have a little bit of a line where people can go. We make it really clear in the reception area how we distance ourselves. And really, a lot of the effort will be to make sure that receptionist is feeling safe as well as the client.
Great. I'm going to do one more question, gentlemen. I think this is a good one to end on. Do you feel that there will be a cultural shift, or do you feel that there will be a slight cultural shift, either stronger, weaker, or same, when post-COVID changes are made to office space and remote work? Paul, I'll let you start.
Crystal ball. Yeah. We addressed this question earlier, I think, in terms of cultural shift. I think over time, I think, we're going to strike a balance like we always do. There's been discussion about changes for years and years, and, workplace of the future, right? And I think that we're just going to continue to work in different ways as we have been even pre-COVID, but I think we're going to have a natural balance. And I think that we're going to get our technology issues worked out. I think we're going to have our in-person versus, away from the office a little more, but all in all, I think we're going to be able to maintain the cultures that we have in place today.
Joseph?
Yeah, I think that there's no way that we can have worked from home for over a year without there being some change to the way day-to-day operations occur. I do think that we're going to have to figure it out. Figure out how do associates become part of the firm? How do you enable those meetings? I think that it's even if you're an office or a firm that typically would want everyone there all the time, I also think that firms are going to need to become more flexible with what the attorneys and even staff want, because we're all going to be competing in a market where people have lived with flexibility and they will expect flexibility going forward. So we're going to have to figure out a way to build that into our operations and our real estate.
Great, thank you. Chris?
Buzz, I see it through the prism of policy and space. And on the policy side, I think that if, as a result of COVID, the policy is that, certainly, there has to be a structured return to the office, and maybe that policy, I'm just hypothetical, maybe that policy is a flexible work schedule where people are required to come in 2 to 3 days a week. I think that may address the cultural concerns. People that are getting that face time, they're able to develop professionally, and there's collaboration. The collateral side, the kind of the physical, the lease side, I think will follow the policy. That and it may be that if you just signed a 10-year lease 2 years ago, you may not have a lot of flexibility to reduce that footprint. But if you have a lease coming due in, say, 2 years, then maybe if the policy, you understand the policy in advance of doing the property search and the programming and the lease negotiations, maybe you can say, all right, based on a diversity factor where I'm only going to have a certain amount of people in for 2 or 3 days a week, and I need this amount of space, I can reduce my footprint in that office by 20%. So I think there will be a strong look at the physical side, the real estate side, but I think it's going to follow the policy.
John?
Yeah, I can't see a world where it just kind of goes back to normal. I mean, we've been doing this for a year and people are used to working from home. I go back to the surveys. We know that people want to keep doing that. I think, to Christopher's point, it'll be really hard to put a policy in place that says, well, everybody's required to come in 4 days a week and think that that's going to be progressive, both in terms of keeping talent and in general, just what you were talking about, Chris, it's on the real estate side, but it's really all over the place. There's opportunities with our library team having less paper there. There's opportunity with our governance to make sure that we're smarter there as well. There's a lot that we can do right now in terms of kind of being a little bit more flexible. But there's that fine line, and that's where nobody has a crystal ball. How do you kind of draw that line of allowing that flexibility, but also being smart? So you can be smart in all these areas and keep that momentum going that we've all seen over the last year and not lose it all.
Great. Well, we find ourselves at 1:15. I want to thank each of you for your time today and for your participation as panelists. Thank you for staying on a few extra minutes. And thank you to all of our participants out there. If there are any additional questions or if anyone wants any more information, please reach out to us via email at info@interiorarchitects.com. That's info@interiorarchitects.com. We will be releasing a recording of the webinar in the following days to everyone who participated today. I'd like to end, besides thanking you, distinguished gentlemen, again for participating. It's been an honor to be the moderator on this webinar, and certainly an engaging discussion. You know, the words that have echoed in my head for the past several months is from the ancient Greek philosopher: the only constant in life, the only thing that we can be sure will happen is change. And clearly that is something that we are dealing with on a minute-by-minute basis, it seems, at times. So thank you all again. Everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing everyone in person one day very, very soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.